confidence, and then I think team was just like how we moved the ball, and then I had open shots because we moved the ball, and I knocked them down today. I mean, all my shots were...
In recent weeks, a growing sense of concern has settled over fans, analysts, and basketball lovers alike, particularly those invested in Caitlin Clark's rookie campaign and long-term development with the Indiana Fever. Not just because of the mounting losses the team has endured, but more disturbingly due to the manner in which those losses are materializing. Through the visible suppression of Clark's natural game, the consistent reduction of her shot attempts, her increasingly peripheral usage in offensive schemes, and the puzzling decision to relegate a generational talent to the role of a decoy rather than a dynamo. We're not witnessing a typical transition from college to pro. We're witnessing a coaching and system-based misalignment that, if not corrected, risks stunting one of the most electrifying prospects women's basketball has ever seen. Time and again, we see Clark catching the ball in the corner after jogging, off a poorly executed screen, forced to create something with 8 to 10 seconds left on the shot clock. In traffic, often with two defenders collapsing, her turnovers are rising not necessarily due to poor decision-making but because she's being handed the ball in no-win scenarios, late in the possession, with limited options, rather than being allowed to orchestrate from the top of the key, as she did with extraordinary success at Iowa. And while people continue to question why Clark isn't replicating her NCAA dominance in the pros, the answer stares us in the face. She was the system at Iowa. Everything flowed through her. She dictated tempo, spacing, and rhythm, and had the autonomy to read and react in real time. Now, under head coach Stephanie White's more rigid, motion-heavy offensive framework, Clark is forced into an ill-fitting mold, required to share initiator duties with lesser creators like Kelsey Mitchell or Ari McDonald, who are talented in their own right but lack Clark's command of space and gravity on the floor. You simply don't clip the wings of a player like Caitlin Clark and expect her to soar. She's not a traditional two-guard or a system cog. She's a heliocentric offensive force, more in the vein of Luka Doncic, James Harden, or even Trey. Young players who thrive when the game bends to their vision, not when they're asked to adapt to schemes that do not honor their unique skill set. And the consequences are becoming clearer by the game. The Fever's offense stagnates in late-game situations. Possessions collapse under shot clock pressure, and Clark's rhythm, so vital to her shot-making confidence, gets disrupted. We've seen it. The first quarter against the Valkyries began with Clark as the initiator, grabbing rebounds, pushing the pace, stepping into confident mid-range shots, and pulling up from three in transition. The team jumped to a 23-4 lead. Not because of some grand design but because Clark was allowed to be Clark, spontaneous, fearless, dynamic. But instead of building on that momentum, the game script shifted. Clark was benched per pre-planned, rotational bursts, and upon returning, she was again thrust into secondary or tertiary roles, having to defer to McDonald or Mitchell, reduced to curling around soft screens that do nothing to shake defenders or open clean looks. When Clark receives the ball in motion 25 feet from the rim, with the defense already set and the shot clock dwindling, her margin for creativity disappears. Her game is not built on decoy action or forced rhythm, it's built on reading help, defense, collapsing it with penetration, and making the right play. Whether that's pulling up for three or threading a pass through traffic. And yet, the current offensive scheme gives her neither the time nor the spacing to do so. What's more confounding is that this is not an isolated issue. Fans are not just watching the losses pile up, they're watching the game plan slowly bleed the joy and confidence from a player whose spark is the very reason millions tuned into college basketball over the last 3 years. The reason WNBA ratings have surged, arenas are packed, and the cultural conversation around women's sports is exploding. When Clark doesn't cook, the whole kitchen suffers, and it's not because she's incapable of doing so, but because she's being handed a butter knife and asked to carve a steak. The coaching staff's intention may not be malicious. Indeed, there is likely a sincere effort to protect Clark, ease her transition, and balance veteran voices on the team. But protection becomes suffocation when it disallows growth, and balance becomes regression when it means marginalizing your most transcendent talent. No one questions Harden shooting 30 times a game, or Luka taking over every fourth quarter possession, because everyone understands that's how those teams function and win. Why then is Clark, the WNBA's golden ticket and a proven offensive engine, treated like a role player? Why is she not initiating in every half-court set? Why is she not playing the pick-and-roll with Aaliyah Boston as the primary decision-maker, especially when we've seen that very combo work? And yes, it's fair to critique aspects of Clark's game. Her handle at times gets loose, her efficiency can dip under pressure, and her defense is a work in progress. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You build a developmental arc around her strengths, not away from them. The idea that Caitlin Clark should be molded into a version of herself that fits a motion offense feels backward. You don't draft a Ferrari and then try to drive it like a minivan. Clark's playmaking brilliance shines when the pace is quick. The floor is spaced, and she's free to make mistakes while experimenting in real time. That's how she learns. That's how she grows. That's how she elevates those around her, including Boston, who herself looks muted and hesitant in this rigid setup. The offense should be a two-woman dance between Clark and Boston, a high-low tandem with shooters stretching the court and cutters feeding off the gravity of their synergy. Instead, we get disjointed possessions where Clark is a late option. Boston gets few post touches, and the offense becomes reactive rather than proactive. The numbers support this too. Clark's usage rate, shot attempts, and time of possession have trended downward in games where the Fever fail to score effectively. The deeper issue is that you cannot ask Clark to be both the savior and the sacrificial lamb. If she's the reason fans are in the building, then she has to be given the reins. You don't light a match and then hide it in a drawer. You let it burn. You build a fire around it, and you feed it fuel. And yet, every time Clark is parked in the corner while others run sets through clogged lanes and ineffective screens, it feels like the organization is dousing its own flame. The sad truth is, we are seeing what happens when a system is prioritized over the player that could redefine it. Fans didn't sign up to see Caitlin Clark iced out of games. They didn't fall in love with Iowa Clark just to see Indiana Clark stand in the corner and watch. They came for the magic, the no-look passes, the logo threes, the quick-release mid-range daggers. And they stayed for the hope that this style of play could revolutionize women's basketball. That revolution can still happen, but not if Clark is asked to shrink her game to fit an outdated structure. The WNBA is evolving. The Fever should too. Because if not, the real risk isn't just missing the playoffs, it's wasting the most promising career the league has ever had the privilege to host. Let Clark play like Clark. Let her lead, let her fail, let her figure it out. Because the only real failure would be trying to turn a one-of-one into a copy of something she never was.
I mean, Reek is throwing so much attention, so I think we can definitely take an advantage out of that. And then it's just fun to play with her. Like, as she said, we're improving in it.
What's most frustrating right now, beyond the mounting losses or the on-court sloppiness, is the systemic mishandling of Caitlin Clark's offensive role with the Indiana Fever. And it starts with the recurring mistake of feeding her the ball in spots that simply do not align with where or how she thrives. The inefficiency is structural. We're watching possession after possession where Clark, instead of initiating offense at the top of the key or creating with the ball in her hands, is forced to operate from the wing or corner after coming off ineffective pin downs or loose screens that barely make contact. If you're going to play her off-ball, which is already a compromise, then at least give her the kind of elite screens that Steph Curry gets. With Kayvon Looney sealing defenders or Draymond Green initiating dribble handoffs with real angles. But instead, Clark is stuck in these pseudo-Steph sets with nobody actually helping her get open. So what's the result? Turnovers, stalled possessions, and rushed shot clock bailouts. The ball eventually finds Clark late in the possession when the defense has already keyed in, and she's forced to create magic out of nothing, which is unfair and inefficient. That possession where she ends up dumping it to Michaela Timpson, who is then left to launch a low-percentage shot with the clock winding down. It encapsulates everything wrong with this system. These are preventable sequences. These are offensive breakdowns stemming not from execution, but from philosophy. Caitlin Clark should be starting every play with the ball in her hands. Give her a high pick hand roll with Alia Boston, or just let her ISO from the top. If the double comes, she has the vision to pass. If it doesn't, she's going to create a shot for herself or collapse the defense. Basketball is not that complicated when your point guard is the most dynamic creator in the game, yet somehow we're overcomplicating it by running her off lazy off-ball actions and pretending she's Kyle Korver or Reggie Miller, which she's not. She leads the WNBA in points off the dribble for a reason. She's an elite shot creator, not a catch-and-shoot role player. So why keep forcing her into a role that doesn't suit her? The confusion only deepens when you realize that while the Fever offense keeps marginalizing their superstar, the defensive side isn't doing them any favors either. The team's inability to get stops to generate defensive rebounds and force missed shots is killing their transition game, which is one of Clark's strongest assets. When you're constantly taking the ball out of the net, there's no opportunity to push the pace, to play fast, to run. In this particular game, we saw defensive mismatches left and right. Why is Ari McDonald guarding a post player like Temi Fagbinal on the block? That's not a knock on McDonald, who's scrappy and quick, but she's undersized for that defensive assignment. And what happens? Boston has to come help, and then the whole rotation collapses. You get to on the ball, down low. Someone's wide open in the corner, and boom, the Valkyries drill another three. And the more threes they hit, the hotter they get, the less margin for error you have. This is a team that can flat out shoot, when you give them the rhythm to do so. The Fever, by doubling the post without a hard strategy, basically invited that rhythm. And the defensive breakdowns didn't stop there. You see these moments where players like Kelsey Mitchell get beat backdoor, and instead of recovering or adjusting, it seems like the team is in a zone, which makes no sense when your smallest player is guarding a big spot, and your actual bigs, like Boston, are pulled too far up and help. The result? Sophie Cunningham is left having to make 2 reads at once, and the corner shooter ends up wide open again. This is not just bad execution, it's bad coaching. The spacing is off, the help rotations are unclear, and most importantly, the adjustments are non-existent. And when you shift back to offense, the stubbornness continues. The Valkyries had one of the most clogged paints we've seen all season, yet the Fever kept trying to force their way inside. No mid-range adjustments, no perimeter strategy. Players like Boston and Mitchell weren't stepping into space. They weren't reading what the defense was giving them. And again, that's not just on the players. Coaching is about strategy. It's about reading the opponent and adjusting in real time. You can't just run into the wall and hope it breaks. You have to go around it, or you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes every possession. The Valkyries are long, athletic, physical, and disciplined. They made it nearly impossible to get anything easy at the rim. But the Fever didn't respond by spacing the floor or letting Clark initiate more to stretch the defense. Instead, they kept driving into the clogged paint, wasting possessions, while the Valkyries continued to find their rhythm on the other end. And this is where it gets painful, because there were glimmers of hope. The Fever cut the lead down to 5 at one point. Clark started getting touches again. The pace picked up. Then what happens? Stephanie White pulls Clark for her scheduled rest, and just like that, momentum evaporates. And look, we get it. The whole 3-2-4 minute burst rotation is about managing Clark's minutes, easing her into pro conditioning, etc. But there's also something to be said for feel, for game flow, for riding the hot hand. You can't always be rigid with your plan, especially when your star player is sparking a run. Basketball is a game of runs, and when you sit your best player in the middle of one, you kill your own comeback. After Clark went to the bench, the Valkyries immediately blew the game open again, extending the lead to 20. That's how fast it happens against teams that can shoot and run like that. The Bay Area fans should be thrilled. The Valkyries are legit, and if you're a Steph Curry fan, you have to admire how this team spaces, cuts, and launches threes with zero hesitation. But the Fever, they're in trouble. Not just because they lost, but because the loss felt avoidable. The loss felt predictable. It felt like the product of poor planning, misused personnel, and stubborn decision-making. And Clark, despite having one of the better plus-minuses on the team during her minutes, despite playing solid basketball, didn't even get enough shot attempts to make a dent. We are now deep into a pattern where the scheme is working against her, not with her. Again and again, she's touching the ball with 12 seconds left on the clock. Again and again, she's getting trapped on the wing, with no spacing, no movement,